have been in Pakistan, and for a long time the money, the finance, and to a certain extent even the military had been controlled by the Haqqanis. Sushant Sareen, your reading please, and then I'll bring in Ambassador Sajanhar.
So a couple of things. Just one point to what Maha was saying, that there are no women and women rights. I think the women have been given the right to live as long as they can, and beyond that, for them to expect anything under a Taliban dispensation is expecting too much. But aside of that, on this cabinet, look, number one, it is very clearly a cabinet which has been made in Pakistan and for the Pakistanis. They have done a bit of a razor's edge walk or a tightrope walk, trying to accommodate the various factions and give them reasonably important positions. But what is most important is that the appointment of Hasan Akhund, who was, if you go into his background, way back in the Taliban regime, number one, he was a completely incompetent fellow. He was the foreign minister, and then he was sacked because he was a very he was quite hardline, and was not accommodating, was not ready to compromise on anything, and that was creating problems for that regime. Number one. Number two, so he had been removed. But later on, after the then Prime Minister or whatever goes for the Prime Minister, Mullah Rabbani had died. This fellow Akhund had been made the he was heading the cabinet at that point of time. This is at the time of 9/11. He was the head of the government at that time. So technically he was senior to Baradar. Although this junior and senior bit does not really matter very much in this entire setup. But he was heading the Quetta, the Shura out there, the Rehbari Shura in Quetta. So he has been a part of the top hierarchy, number one. Number two, he has been a hardliner. So by a hardliner, what I mean is that in the 1990s, there were two factions even within the Taliban. One was the so-called the faction which wanted some degree of accommodation with the Northern Alliance and the others. That was the faction which was led by Mullah Rabbani, who then later died of cancer. The other faction was what was called the Fighting Club in those days. This guy was a member of the Fighting Club. Okay, these were guys who said that we must use military means to occupy everything and crush the opposition.
Right.
So please remember that he comes from that background. He hasn't changed. Even after 9/11, there were efforts made to turn him around. He never turned around. So he is uncompromising. He is hardline. And that probably gives you some potence of what is likely to happen in the future. Number three, I think you have to understand that there was never going to be any inclusive government. Look, people who keep talking about Abdullah being given a position or Karzai being given a position, I don't know what they are smoking or what they are drinking. Simply because Karzai was the president of the country. To expect that he would be given a leadership role was to expect the moon. It was not going to happen, right? If he's allowed to live, although I think he's virtually under house arrest, as is Abdullah. But if these guys were allowed to live, that was good enough, okay? Neither was Abdullah going to be given anything because he was virtually the prime minister in, later on, and he was a presidential candidate. You think he will become a minister of women and child development or something like that? That's not going to happen.
Correct.
So, I don't know where this whole concept of inclusive government and including these people in government was concerned. Number three, we haven't seen any real ethnic representation right now from whatever list I have seen right now. I might be wrong, but I don't think the smaller ethnic groups have been given any representation. Number four, the Haqqanis, while they've been given the interior ministry, I think what is very critical is the defense ministry. The guy who controls the defense ministry traditionally really calls the shots. It was Ahmad Shah Massoud was the defense minister. When Hikmat Yar was appointed the prime minister, a prime minister who could not even enter Kabul. Okay, so the defense ministry is a very critical position, and this is going to be an uneasy balance between the Haqqanis and this guy. But I would imagine that the Haqqanis would get the lion's share of governorships in the areas in which they are very powerful. So I think that is something which you need to watch out for. But how will this government now interact with the rest of the world when an internationally designated terrorist is given the, it's like basically giving the robber the the keys to the house. So I don't know how this is going to be rationalized around the world. I don't know how the Americans are going to rationalize it. I'm sure they'll spin some yarn to accept this. But if they do, then I'm sure there are going to be very serious consequences.
Correct. Correct. But the fact is, where is AKHUN Chahta is a question that rankles, and there are viewers who are watching this.
He's probably in Rawalpindi.
Is he in Rawalpindi or is he in Beijing? Are the CCP hugging him close?
Or he's in a grave.
We don't know where he is, but the fact is that if he is not yet surfaced, is he ever going to surface? Is he just now an apparition or an illusion that's been created, and then they're going to run this entire show? Or is he being held to ransom or held by a group of people who will now start making the moves once there is a certain amount of announcement or a certain amount of fruition and structure or construct?
Anand, if I might just say a sentence.
Ji, sure.
Yeah, so the other thing which is very striking about this particular cabinet which has been announced is the fact that most of the people, virtually everyone, are people from the 90s. So there is really none of the new, fresh blood which has been brought in. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So to imagine that Taliban 2.0 will be very different from Taliban 1.0, I think you are again expecting the move. Number one. Number two, I think you should bear in mind the fact that because there has been this uneasy kind of an accommodation between the militants, the military commanders who are fighting on the ground and the political guys, which is Baradar and the rest of them, who were, the interface with the rest of the world. So I think there is that uneasy kind of a coexistence between these guys. And finally, I think the whole idea of keeping so many people in an acting position is because they are going to be acting. And the guys who are really going to be calling the shots and really going to be exercising executive authority are sitting in Apara and Islamabad.
Well, there is a Pindi Shura which I keep quoting General KJ Singh. It stays with me, and that Pindi Shura, how effective it is going to be, and whether or not they will all have to migrate to Afghanistan because they just
are not acting. They are not going to be
it's just
capacity.
No, but the point is that is the Pindi Shura also acting of its own free will, or there is somebody else? There is another Shura which is sitting somewhere in Beijing which is orchestrating all of this. There are many who are asking this question, and whether or not in the days to come the Pakistanis will realize that they've bitten off far more than they can actually chew and digest. And is this going to consume the nation itself? We'll have to wait and watch. But right now, Ambassador Sajanar, thank you for your patience. Dr. Tarakarta and Sushant Sareen have shared their views. How would you see this? Now, Sher Mohammad Stanekzai, who's spoken to us here at CNN News 18, is going to be the Deputy Foreign Minister. So he is going to be assisting Amir Muttaqi in the Foreign Ministry. He is the one who's got a certain amount of engagement, and he was visiting and engaging with all the embassies. In fact, even the Indian ambassador to Qatar had a word with him, especially on our safety of our assets and safety of our people, and also safe evacuation. But Ambassador Sajanar, how do you see this? Is this going to now keep us in a perpetual state of alert?